live translation in this show and tell, but we do have somebody live tweeting. We have Klinos in the room, and she will be able to translate any question in Welsh if anyone does have one. So please do post a question in Welsh in the chat if you would like to. With that, I will then hand over to Lisa to kick us off.
Hi, thanks, Henry. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Thomas, and I work on the digital inclusion team in Welsh Government. Back in January this year, we began working with the Centre for Digital Public Services to undertake a review and mapping exercise of digital inclusion activity across Wales. We've also worked with Welsh Government Data Map Wales team to transfer the data from the mapping exercise onto Data Map Wales. So the purpose of this work is to determine the types of activity in any local area, to understand where there are gaps in provision, to enable us to implement more targeted interventions that can inform us as Welsh Government, also local authorities, community organisations, and eventually citizens. So as you know, digital is critical now to everything we do in our work, in our social life, and also to access essential public services. Digital transformation is increasing at pace, especially due to the impact of the pandemic. Therefore, it is important that we identify and implement relevant activity to support those people who may be digitally excluded. So that's it for me. I'd now like to hand over to Henry from the Centre for Digital Public Services, who's going to tell you more about the mapping work.
Thank you, Lisa. So welcome everyone to this show and tell today. Thank you all for joining. This is just a quick agenda for the session today. So we'll start with just some introductions, looking a bit more about what our aims were for the Digital Inclusion Review. We'll then talk about the two kind of core work streams within that review. So our main activity was mapping digital inclusion activities, so finding out what our organisation is doing across Wales to tackle digital inclusion. The second work stream we then looked at was how does Wales compare to other nations on digital inclusion? And we particularly wanted to understand Wales within the context of the UK, but we also looked at some leading nations within the EU as well. We will have a couple of points where we will have time for questions, but please do feel free to put questions in the chat as we go, and we'll then flag when we're going to take questions by hand. And we will talk about next steps at the end. Just to introduce the team that worked on this project. So this project was initially led by the Centre for Digital Public Services, particularly myself, Aoife, Rick and Simon, and myself and Aoife are on the call today. Initially, the Centre for Digital Public Services was commissioned to go out and find out in the last financial year what digital inclusion activities were happening across Wales, and that then became this Digital Inclusion Review. Through the project, we worked really closely with the Welsh Government Financial and Digital Inclusion team, who are listed on the right, and many of them are on the call today. And it's that team that will be taking on this work after the finish of the review. And I should say that we did wrap up the initial Digital Inclusion Review in April this year. Just a very quick recap on CDPS, if anybody hasn't worked with us or heard of us yet. So the Centre for Digital Public Services is an arm's length body of the Welsh Government, which was set up to support other public services in Wales to deliver better digital public services and to do that sustainably. Building on what Lisa said a moment ago, this was our project goal for the Digital Inclusion Review. So primarily, we wanted to create a single directory covering recent, current and planned digital inclusion activities in Wales. By recent, we defined that to be things that had happened in the last 2 years, and we didn't define planned, but basically we wanted to know if there were particular activities or projects that organisations already had a plan to deliver in the future. With that data then on what is actually being done to tackle digital inclusion, we wanted to understand whether there were any trends, either in terms of what is being delivered across Wales, so our different regions or potentially different local authority areas doing different things, but also are there any demographic trends, particularly who is actually being supported by this work, or who is the target audience. As I mentioned, CDPS led this project while the review was ongoing, working closely with the Welsh Government Digital Inclusion team and Data Map Wales, But now that the project has ended, it is the Welsh Government Digital Inclusion team that has the remit to take this forward. A quick overview of the project then. So finishing in April 2022, we worked on this for about 13 weeks. I think many people on the call provided data through the course of that project, and we're really, really appreciative of that support. We found out about almost 1,500 different things that are being done in Wales to tackle digital inclusion. So I think it immediately shows the huge scale of stuff that's being done. This is really an area of interest. We were able to find out about those activities from 48 different organizations, and we had the help of 7 different networks that shared our survey. So, for example, having the support of the Welsh Local Government Association to reach out to local government partners. We also analysed 6 different nations' approach to digital inclusion, and we were able to speak to more than 20 leaders working on digital inclusion. With that, I will now hand over to Aoife to talk about what we found out.
Great, thank you, Henry. So just before I talk about how we collected that data, I just wanted to illustrate what we mean by a digital inclusion activity, and that's best shown through an example. So Working Denbighshire, in partnership with Digital Communities Wales, they currently have 10 Chromebooks that they loan out to adults who are excluded from the labour market. And those Chromebooks are loaded with SIM cards. So that in itself is defined as a single activity. Now, to date, those Chromebooks have been loaned 24 times. So we took that as them having helped 24 individual people so far. In terms of how we collected the data then, so we did send out a survey across 7 networks, as Henry said, and thank you to everybody who took the time to fill out that survey. We're really appreciative of that time that you spent. And we also held interviews with some of you as well, where we collected that data and understood a little bit more about what your organisations were doing. In addition, we also collected data from Digital Communities Wales. So we took an export of everything that they had done with organisations across Wales over the past 2 years. And then looking at the UK home nations, we conducted interviews with the digital inclusion leads in the Northern Irish Executive, the Scottish Government, and DCMS in the Central UK Government. And we collected extra data through desk research, in particular for those EU international comparators. In terms of then what we did with the data, so we carried out analyses on that data that we collected. We compiled this into a report, which we handed over to Lisa's team in Welsh Government, and that was compiled along with our learnings from the conversations that we had with the digital inclusion leads in the other UK nations and the desk research from the EU exemplars, where organisations consented for their data to be shared. That has been uploaded to Datamap Wales, and Kevin will be showing a live demo on how to use that. That information isn't quite finalised just yet, but we're hoping that it will be published very shortly for both organisations and members of the public to interact with that. In terms of what we learned then, I just wanted to pull out some of our key findings from the review. So what types of digital activities are being run in Wales? So we used a framework where we split the types of activities into 6 different categories. Now, it doesn't mean that that an activity didn't necessarily fall into one of those each types of activities. They might have been 2 or 3 different types. So the most common types of activities that are being run by organisations are supporting people to develop basic digital skills and gifting, loaning or heavily discounted devices. And that's sort of the support that is offered by Digital Communities Wales. So that could reflect organisations who might have worked with Digital Communities Wales before and then continuing to run those activities in the future. The third most common type of activity was directly assisting people to use digital services. So what we mean by that is an individual might come into a public library and want support in accessing, for example, a pension service, and they're being offered support to access that online. Those types of activities tend to be run by public sector organisations such as local authorities, such as libraries. And then finally, the least common types of activities that were being run were ensuring everyone can access and afford broadband and mobile data, although we know that there are very large infrastructure projects that are being run across Wales that fall under that category. And then also training people on essential digital skills for work and helping people to access adjustments to digital services or devices where they need. So these activities, the proportion of those activities have actually shifted slightly over time. So here, this graph shows how the change in those types of activities from recent, current to planned. So if we take, for example, the blue line at the top, which is supporting people to develop basic digital skills, you can see that actually over time, the proportion of activities that come under that bracket has increased. So where we say recent, we define that as being in the past 2 years, and then we have current and planned. We didn't actually specify a time frame for those planned activities. If we take gifting, learning, or heavily discounted devices, you can see that actually as we move out of the pandemic, there has been a decrease in the proportion of activities that come under that bracket. And that may reflect the fact that there was quite a large emphasis on that at the start of the pandemic. And that has sort of, shifted to helping people to develop basic digital skills. But I'd like to emphasize that just because there's been less of a focus, it doesn't mean that those, for example, device schemes that were started up at the start of the pandemic, they are still running. So where is that support being delivered? So we collected some information about the location of those activities, and we focused on local authority area because a lot of the activities were spread across a local authority rather than being located in one singular sort of town. So on the left, you can see the geographic coverage that we found from the Digital Inclusion Review. And you can see that we had activities across all local authorities, which was really positive. And we still are awaiting some information from other local authorities. So I think the absolute numbers might shift over time as we collect more data there. On the right, you can see the geographic coverage from Digital Communities Wales and where they're working with their partnerships. Again, there's quite a significant number of activities happening in each local authority area, which is really great to see. And finally, in terms of how long these activities run for, it's actually less so that these activities are run as discrete projects and more that these activities are part of a day-to-day work of an organization. So an individual can access support from an organization on a daily basis or as and when they need, which is really positive. I'm now going to hand it over to Kevin to give us a live demonstration of Data Map Wales.
Now, pawb, afternoon. I'm Kevin Williams. I work for Welsh Government. I'm the lead product manager for Data Map Wales. So I'm just going to share my screen a second. Bear with us. Okay, I'm going to pop my video off a second because it's off-putting seeing myself. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. I'm going to just go full screen. Bear with us. Okay, that okay? Everyone see it? Yeah. Thumbs up.
Not got it just yet, Kevin.
Right, hold on a second. Let's try again. There we go. That should be okay now.
Yeah, it's just come up. Got it.
Excellent. Okay. Right. I'll show you what we've loaded and how we've managed to map it. Basically, what we've got is the overall map, which is what we call a thematic map. That's the digital inclusion total of all activities. As you can see, the lighter colors are lesser activities and the darker colors are more activities. We can zoom in and have a look around, and we can click on these counties as well to get a bit more information. What we've done then, we've broken it down into the activity areas that you just seen on the previous slide. So we can now show digital inclusion by postcode. We can show the gifting. So that's showing the gifting distribution. So as you can see from here, you've got counties that obviously doing better than others, and you've got higher levels. If I go through each category of the 6, you can see the distribution there on digital skills. We can see the distribution on training. We can scroll down and see the distribution on directly assisting people. Interesting one. And we can look at the last one, which is not last but one, broadband access, mobile data. And then we've got the last one, which is directory assisting people. Sorry, and last one, and adjustments to digital devices. So you can see each one of the questions has its own thematic map. Together with this, because Data Map Wales has got lots of other data that you can use in a contextual mapping, we can put on things like the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. This one is showing employment, and then we can overlay, for instance, one of the other questions, and we can use the little clever things in Data Map Wales, like the comparison tools. So we can have a look at deprivation, we can zoom in. Beauty now of Data Map Wales, you've got so much information in it. You can look at your data sets on digital inclusion and try and get some correlation between other things. So that's your Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, and you can start getting some insights into what's going on there. So we've got some clever tools in Data Map Wales as well that we can use to download this. So when this data is published, then what you'll be able to do is go to Data Map Wales, click on a particular area of interest. Sorry, I'll pop that one off now. And we can then do a download. So downloads in Data Map Wales can be in spatial format for your use in GIS systems, or they can be downloaded as a spreadsheet with all of the relevant attributes in there. So you can do downloads. You've also got a few other things, like we can filter data. So we've got attributes tables, so we can see the results themselves, as you can see from local authorities there. And we could do some simple filtering, like show me how many that are, below 5 activities, and then the map will adjust to that. So you can see then that the filtering is quite simple to do, and it's instant, so you can analyze your data, have a quick look at it. Anything you filtered here can be downloaded as well. So once the data is public, then you can download this data. We can do quite sophisticated filtering as well. So you can do other things like spatial areas. So if you wanted to filter by categories and draw a polygon or whatever, you can do that as well. So we've got some quite clever stuff in here that can be used. If you look at some of the others, like Postcode District, put that one on very quickly, and we have a quick look at that. Then you've got all of the questions, so you can now start looking at postcode districts, for instance, where where we lesson 1, and then you can see then that data instantly updates depending on your filters. It's very similar in effect to data filter in Excel, so you can combine any of these options. So we can do parts of the postcode and things like that. And you can see the activity then and kind of refine it, ready for your download or whatever you want to do to it. So I think in a nutshell, that's probably what we've done in Data Map Wales, unless you want me to expand on anything else, Henry?
No, that's really helpful. Thanks, Kevin. I suggest that we pause at that point and go to questions both on Aoife's presentation and your demo.
Okay.
Shall I unshare your screen?
Yes, please.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Kevin. I might suggest, I know there's been quite a few questions around the digital skills framework, and there's been some kind of responses from the team. I don't know if Lisa or Nigel, it would be helpful just to say something about the digital skills framework, or particularly how the Welsh Government uses it.
Sorry, Henry. Yes, we do use the digital skills framework. We do take a slightly different approach in Welsh Government, in that we don't distinguish between essential skills for life and for work, but we do refer to the skills framework. I think there was a question in particular with regards to the problem solving and what we define by that. And I think Derry posted a really helpful response. So they are problem solving skills, are those skills that are required to find solutions to problems using digital tools, everyday digital tools, and online services. So that was in response to that specific question.
Thanks, Lisa. There was then a question from Sam, which was about just looking at, as Kevin was demoing the map, are those kind of gaps, or are the fact that some LAs are showing more work than others, is that reflective of the fact that there's less going on, or is that to do with data collection? I might just, Lisa, do you want to go?
We definitely know this is not reflective of what's going on. We know there's a lot of activity going on across all local authority areas in Wales. We did a 50% response rate from local authorities to your survey. So any digital leads from local authorities that are on this call that haven't responded to the survey are more than welcome. We'd like you to get in touch with us on the digital inclusion team in the mailbox. We've got an email address that's on the last slide for you to get in touch with us. And we are very, very keen to kind of get that Data Map Wales populated as accurately and as robustly as possible, because as Kevin showed, it's a fantastic tool. It's really useful for us as policymakers, it's useful for local authorities, it's useful for community organisations, and to make that as accurate as possible, obviously, we need that full kind of data set to be reflected in Data Map Wales.
Really helpful. And just to respond directly to Donna's question a bit earlier about whether we will share what those activities are. So we asked through the survey whether people were happy to have that data published, and the vast majority of responses were happy for that data to be published. And the primary way that we're going to make that available is through Data Map Wales, which will be online shortly.
I can answer the question from Kieran if you want.
Yes, please, Kevin.
The answer is yes. We can map by population density against this data. So it's just a matter of a little bit of work to look at the like built up areas, for instance, is one data set within Data Map Wales. So you can, we can certainly look across that. But it does depend on, with population density, on census figures. So we do load the ONS data. So yeah, that little bit of work, but yeah, we could do that.
Thanks, Kevin. And then there's a question from Mark about, do we have data on needs as well as activity? So for example, do we know where there are particular skills deficits? I can talk about some of the data that we've used in the digital inclusion review on that, but I wonder if Lisa or Nigel, again, there might be some, you might want to talk about kind of the data that you use more generally for that question.
Yeah, that data would probably come from the National Survey for Wales, and we use that as our main kind of data source for that type of question. It's due to be published, the annual one is due to be published this week, I believe tomorrow, the National Survey for Wales data. So we'd probably be able to answer that question once that's published. We'd have up-to-date data on that then.
Thanks, Lisa. And then I'm just looking at the questions as I go down. So there's a question from James Vale about, has any research been done around outcomes of the various activities being undertaken? I can speak directly. So certainly within Digital Communities Wales, there are certain KPIs that they measure with all of their activities. For example, how many people have been directly or indirectly supported by each activity. And that's something that we collected through the survey, and also asked other organisations other than DCW to provide a similar metric. I don't know if anyone else wants to talk about any other kind of evaluation or outcomes work that's been done.
Harry?
Hi, yeah, just to come in there, just from Digital Communities Wales point of view. So we developed a theory of change for the programme last year, and we've got some fairly clear outcomes for the programme, you know, looking at whether organisations and clients that we've supported have achieved their digital inclusion goals, kind of measuring where people who have received support are 12 months down the line as well. So we've got a bit more of a longitudinal view of the impact. So yeah, we for the past 14-15 months have been measuring outcomes as well as the KPIs, and obviously I think that gives us much richer information and a much more detailed understanding of the support and areas where we maybe need to provide more support as well.
Thank you, Terry. That's really helpful. Joselle, do you want to come in on the same point?
Yeah, just to say that, excuse me, my voice is going, that DCW is also has external evaluators to look at the programme at a midpoint and before the end of the contract. So as well as what we look at in terms of impact and measurement on the individuals that receive support, the overall programme has an external evaluator as well. So thanks.
Thanks, Giselle. The next question I had was from Mark Cottle, which asked, can we go down to a finer grained geographic detail? So for example, into lower level super output areas rather than postcodes. This is a challenge that we thought about a lot in gathering the data, because in trying to capture all of the activities happening across an entire nation, activities happen at quite different levels. So there are some things that are being done that are available to every single person in Wales. So for example, there are some funding schemes to support with broadband access that people could be eligible across all of Wales to take part in it. But some other things are much more community-based, might be supported at a postcode level, even smaller than a town. So we wanted to provide the ability for that to be captured in the data. So we asked people to indicate whether their activity was relevant nationally at a place-based level or at a specific postcode, and that's what we gathered. I think it is a tricky one to measure, because I think organisations don't necessarily have a very clear definition, I think, of exactly where their activity is available. But we do have some more information at the activity level of kind of what area they are supporting. Hugh from Gwynedd has said, are we able to sense check information relating to our own local authorities? Lisa, I imagine you'd probably welcome that kind of cross-reference.
Yeah, we definitely would. I mean, it's early days yet, Hugh, to be honest. We're very much at the early stages of development of this, and we would be looking to refine it as we kind of go along. So yes, we would look to sense check it if possible, if there's a mechanism to do that. I agree that local authorities are a bit of a labyrinth, and trying to find the right person to speak to in the local authority to kind of identify all these activities is quite a challenge. So yeah, it's something that we are quite keen to do. Early stages yet, but hopefully that's something we can look at later down the line.
Thanks, Lisa. And I see that Leon's question is also about Gwynedd, and that a sense that perhaps the data for Gwynedd is not up to date. Yeah. So I think probably when this is published online, we'll be very keen to make clear that this is it's not totally finished. It's kind of it's a live view that we want to be as helpful as possible. And I think once that data is available for people to see, we then really welcome any either additional information or any comments on anything that's not quite right.
Yeah. Yeah, and to back to Hugh, because I can see you've just popped another question. We haven't made that decision yet about when the information is going to be made public. We were hoping today's kind of show and tell session is going to generate some more responses from local authorities out there and other community organisations. So once we've gathered those queries, we'll have the discussion and we'll then make the decision about when all the information is going to be made public and when that data is going to be published on Data Map Wales.
Great. With that, I might go on to the second section, and we will have time for more questions after that as well. So I will just share my screen again. Great. So I'll now just talk about the work that we did to compare Wales to other nations. So we started off particularly interested in how Wales compared to the other UK home nations. The obvious first thing to look at when looking at digital inclusion is what percentage of those populations are currently digitally excluded. So this is the number of people that aren't able to currently access the internet or don't have the skills or confidence to be using the internet and digital services. This data is slightly out of date. We have used 2020 figures from the Office for National Statistics, their Internet Users Survey, and we've used that as the most recent kind of good comparison across the four nations. In 2020, this had Northern Ireland coming out as having the most people who are digitally excluded with about 12% of the population, with England doing the best with about 7.5% of their population being digitally excluded. As you can see, Wales came in somewhere in the middle between those two. And in 2020, we'd estimate that this represented about 300,000 people who were digitally excluded. I would note that Digital Communities Wales has more recently estimated that there are about 180,000 people in 2021, I believe, who are digitally excluded. So that potentially suggests quite a lot of progress in this figure. Another interesting thing to note is that from our analysis and the activities we know about so far, we estimate that there are potentially 50,000 people who are being impacted by one or more of the activities that Aoife talked about a moment ago. So that's quite interesting to compare. If I then go on, so then one of the key elements of digital inclusion is digital skills. So people having the skills to access different digital tools or different digital services. In the chat, we were having a conversation about that essential digital skills framework developed by the UK government. Similarly, we have used that as a comparison across the nations, and again, we are using data from 2020. I would note Lisa's point that while the UK government draws a distinction between digital skills for life and digital skills for work, the Welsh government's policy does not draw that distinction at the moment. So the essential digital skills framework is kind of a tiered framework. So at the lowest level are foundations for essential digital skills. An example of that might be something like turning on a computer and then being able to open a browser and find some information about a simple topic, a straightforward topic. And that might be a kind of skill within the foundations for essential digital skills. The next level would then be essential digital skills for life, which might be something more complicated, like signing up for an email account and using it to email somebody. As we then get into essential digital skills for work, that might be something like understanding your company's IT policy and being able to follow it. In 2020, on these foundations for essential digital skills and essential digital skills for life, Wales did come out the least strong on the 4 UK home nations. As you can see on that chart. We did see, however, that on essential digital skills for work, Wales did quite significantly improve between 2020 and 2021 in other figures. And actually, Wales is now doing similarly on essential digital skills for work to the other UK home nations. It's interesting to then look at digital inclusion funding. And there's a chart here that we've gathered from speaking to those different government teams. I would note that this does not reflect total expenditure within each nation on digital inclusion. This is talking about core funding in the sense of central programs within each government that are tackling digital inclusion. The first thing that's interesting to note is that Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland have each created overall national centralised programmes for tackling digital inclusion. So we have Digital Communities Wales on the call within Wales, but then there's also, for example, the Connecting Scotland programme in Scotland. England has not taken that approach and does not have a single centralised programme that is responsible for digital inclusion in England. Instead, it remains the remit of different departments. And for example, you might have projects like the Department for Education giving laptops to school children who aren't currently able to access the internet. So it's more spread out across the departments within England. Then in terms of the scale of funding, this is the annual investment in the financial year 2021-22. We can see that Scotland has allocated significantly more money than the other 3 nations to their central digital inclusion programme. I would note that this does reflect only this year. It doesn't reflect historic expenditure, and we do know that Wales has invested significantly in digital inclusion in recent years. If we then look at how the 4 UK home nations compare across broadband, so this is ensuring that everyone has access to fast, reliable internet, which is again a really core element of digital inclusion. 2 kind of levels of broadband infrastructure that you'll see talked about are, on the left, we have super fast broadband, which is broadband with more than 30 megabits per second download speeds. Roughly, we can think of this as download speeds needed to access current digital services, in particular, on-demand video streaming services, you might be looking to have super fast broadband in order to access those. If we then look on the right, we then have gigabit capable broadband, which is having more than 1,000 megabit per second broadband speed, so significantly faster. And we might think of this as future-proofing our infrastructure such that everybody is ready to use digital services in the future, which might have significantly greater data demands. If we look at then how the nations compare against these, so all 4 UK nations have more than 90% of their population covered with superfast broadband, and all are quite similar, with England doing slightly better and Northern Ireland doing slightly less well than the other nations. If we look at gigabit capable broadband, the picture is more varied, with Wales doing the least well, with only about 1/3 of the population able to access gigabit capable broadband in 2021, compared to 76% in Northern Ireland. In terms of what's being done about this, so there is the UK-wide Project Gigabit, which involves investment of about £5 billion and has a target of getting all of the UK up to 85% coverage by 2025. However, the UK home nation governments are also investing on top of Project Gigabit, and in particular, Wales and Scotland are continuing to invest in getting the last 6% of people to have superfast broadband, while Ireland has been more focusing their investment on hyperfast broadband, which is slightly less quick than gigabit, but is a much faster type of broadband than superfast. So on top of that comparison of UK nations, we also wanted to look at some kind of international best practice and to see how some nations which are commonly regarded as really leading on digital inclusion or digital generally, what they were doing, potentially similarly or differently. So we particularly relied on the Digital Economy and Society Index, which is published annually by the European Commission and effectively it compares different countries across the EU on how they're doing across certain digital outcomes. 2 of them are particularly relevant to digital inclusion. So the 2 of them we'll talk about are digital skills, it's obscured at the top, I think it's digital skills, and connectivity. What we've then done across these 2, we've taken a look at how the UK compares to both the EU average, but also Finland and Denmark as the 2 countries that have quite consistently come out in the top 2 or 3 countries in the DESI for the last 5 years or so. So looking at digital skills, it's interesting to see that the UK is really competing with those leading nations, so really very comparable to Finland and even better than Denmark, and significantly better than the EU average. An interesting thing to note in looking at their strategies across these countries is that Finland and Denmark have really invested, and they talk a lot about investing in their digital skills for the workforce, with quite a specific angle to thinking about what skills people need to take part in modern digitally enabled jobs, while the UK strategy and investment has been more focused on generally skills for life, which of course are also very relevant in the workplace, but less of that specific focus on workplace skills. If we then look at connectivity, the UK does slightly less well against the metric used by DESI. So this is looking at access to ultra-fast broadband, so more than 300 megabits per second, to give another definition. Here we see that the UK has a very similar coverage to the EU average at around 60% of households, which is doing less well than Finland and significantly less well than Denmark, who are quite far ahead in getting this kind of future-proofing level of broadband speeds. That is just a quick rundown of some of the things then that we looked at in terms of country comparisons. I'll just stop sharing my screen and we can take some questions. I can see there's some in the chat. Lisa, would you be best to talk about how your team defines either digital inclusion or digital exclusion?
Yeah, I was gonna pick that up. Thanks, Henry. Yeah, it's a tricky one, to be honest. As you know, digital exclusion covers, it's multifaceted, isn't it? It covers the skills, it covers confidence, it covers access, connectivity, devices, all those things. So in terms of a specific definition, just to give you a little bit of additional information, we as Welsh Government are currently working with the University of Liverpool to develop a minimum digital living standard. So this is a piece of research that the university are doing on our behalf to understand exactly what it means to be digitally excluded in terms of what is the requirement for digital skills, what is the minimum requirement for access. And then once they'll pull all that together, and we're hoping then to have an ultimate definition, minimum digital living standard, that will give us a lot more understanding of that definition. They are going out, they're working with user groups, they're working with lots of different people across Wales, and then in the middle of doing that research work at the moment, hoping to have the final report end of October, early November, and that then will be published on gov.wales.
Thanks, Lisa. So Daniel then had a question about any data on differentiating between download and upload speeds. We did not look into that, or we did not find any data on that. But I don't know if anyone else on the call has any more information about that.
No, I can't give that answer, sorry.
There's then a question from Hugh. Hugh, I wonder if you could just explain your question a bit, as I don't fully understand about. Yeah.
Yes, of course. No worries, Henry. It's part of our digital strategy for schools. We're providing a laptop in the hands of each learner, which will increase the digital inclusion of those that are excluded because of deprivation. You know, that strategy has been published. Rollout will start in September. I was just thinking, is that kind of activity, would that have some kind of a positive outcome on the landscape in Gwynedd, and is that a model that could then be followed elsewhere if it shows an upward turn in terms of inclusion?
That would definitely be captured as one of the activities. We've got 6 activities that we've captured as part of the survey, and that's the gifting and loaning of devices. So that would come under that activity you've just described there, Hugh. But yeah, Gwynedd is underreported on the map currently, and that is exactly the type of activity that the survey would have picked up. So I'm more than happy to have a separate conversation with you and to kind of have that conversation with you offline, so you can give us that information that we can capture.
Okay, diolch, Lisa.
Okay. Nigel?
Hi, Henry, I just wanted to respond to a couple of the questions in the chat bar about broadband speeds, bandwidth, that kind of stuff. And I just wanted to make the point really that it's kind of beyond the scope of this piece of work. I think that's quite a narrow thing around infrastructure and access. And as Lisa's mentioned, you know, digital exclusion, people are excluded for a whole variety of reasons. Our crude definition is people who are not using the internet in the last 3 months, and then we know the causes for that. Access is just one. So, you know, unfortunately, I don't think we've got any infrastructure colleagues on the call, but yeah, that's to do more with the actual access, which is beyond the scope of this piece of work.
Kevin's just posted a comment to say that they have open market review broadband data down to premises level on Datamap Wales. So again, that's another example of how Datamap Wales can be used and how useful it is as a tool to capture various different types of information. So I don't know if that kind of helps to answer that question at all.
Yeah, we have got the all of the white premises and grey and black. They are defining broadband speeds of 30 megabits per second that, you know, are not available or planned at all. I've got all that on my map at the moment. So if you do need to see that by the side of your your data. We've got that already mapped in Datamap Wales. That's the 2021 data. We did the open market review on. There's another data set as well prior to that, so you can see any changes as well, progress that the ISPs have made.
Thank you, Kevin. So I think that covers the point about data. I think we've answered all questions in the chat. There is a bit of a conversation. Chris Owen, I don't know if you wanted to make that point, or if you had any kind of wider thoughts on it.
Yeah, thanks, Henry. No, just to Hugh's point really around considering the purpose of those devices that are going home for the learners to use. So we need to be quite careful around how they're being put out there and how they're being configured, etc. You know, are they for wider use across the family, which could make sense, or are they just to support the learner in their learning, and configurations around that, T's and C's, etc. Just need to be factored in really. So just a point around that.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, if we don't have any immediate questions, I suggest that I pull the last slide up and Lisa will just talk through kind of next steps for the project.
Perfect, thanks, Henry. As Henry said, Cdps have done the initial review and undertaken the mapping work for us, and now they've kind of handed over the responsibility to us on the digital inclusion team in Welsh Government for us to kind of take it forward. So our intention is to take an iterative approach to mapping the digital inclusion activities. At the moment, our priority is to plug those gaps. So as you saw on the map there, our first priority is to plug those gaps and to kind of get as much robust data as we can in the next few weeks to couple of months. And then we're going to use Datamap Wales as a tool then going forward in order to gather the data and then to publish the data on Datamap Wales. So to address the gaps at the moment, we're going to reach out to all those local authorities who didn't respond to the Cdps initial survey as part of the digital inclusion review. And we will be asking for further information and for data through the Datamap Wales platform. And Kevin has reliably informed me there's various wonderful things that we can use Datamap Wales to do. We can issue surveys and different things like that. So we'll be working closely with Kevin and his team in the coming months in order to kind of get that really robust and looking as accurate as possible. Kevin, is it we can issue surveys and things like that, and we can also give local authorities access to update? That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, the platform is a multi-agency platform, so anybody in Wales public sector can access Datamap Wales. If they want to register for a government gateway account, I've got the support email in the chat there, yeah, just make contact with us. Not a problem at all.
Wow. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, last slide. Oh, I think we've covered questions. There we go. So yeah, so get in touch. I mean, please, by all means, if you have any specific queries, if you want to contribute to the data, if you haven't already done so, I've put the digital inclusion mailbox at gov.wales email address on the slide. If you can come to us via that email address, and we'll come back and come out to you, we'll respond to any queries. But we are particularly keen to kind of work with local authorities, organisations in the coming months to get this data really refined and robust. So I can see somebody's got hands up for questions. Sue?
Yeah, I just wanted to raise something, is that as a housing association, we fall between two camps and often get left out of most things. We're not a local authority and we're not a charity. So. Yeah. But we are working really hard as housing associations, and also we are making some big difference. But it just seems very unfair that we don't have access to either the funds that charities do or the tools and resources that local authorities do. I'm just making that comment. You know, there is a gap that is working very hard but not being covered in, you know, we give our statistics, we give our data, but I won't be able to use the data map because I don't have access to it. And likewise, I can't get, you know, free free SIM cards because I'm not a charity. So, you know, I know this isn't the format for it, but I just wanted to raise that with people, that there is an awful lot of people that are doing work that aren't being included in the Welsh Assembly Government's provision.
Okay, thanks for that, Sonia. It is a point. I mean, once we publish Data Map Wales, it is going to be visible to everybody, and that includes any organisations, community organisations. It's not published at the moment because we're not quite ready to publish, but once it's published, it will be up for public view. But I completely take on board your points, your wider points you've made there. Okay, any other final questions before we wrap it up for today? No, it's all gone quiet. Okay, so that just leaves me to say thank you, everybody. Really good attendance today, some really good questions, fantastic engagement in the chat bar. And thank you all for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the sunshine, and thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks all.